In 1980, a film called Taboo quietly arrived in American theaters, and then it exploded. When people talk about the golden age of adult cinema, when explicit content carried genuine emotional weight, when performances felt real instead of manufactured, one title keeps reappearing: Taboo. This film arrived at the tail end of the Porno Chic era, that strange cultural moment when adult films still had theatrical releases, still carried budgets, still attempted real storytelling. But Taboo did something different. It didn't just push boundaries, it crossed them with intention. It's difficult to explain what made Taboo so powerful to audiences who didn't experience that era firsthand. In 1980, American cinema, both mainstream and underground, was still wrestling with what could be shown and what audiences were ready to accept. Social norms had shifted. Family structures were being questioned. Cinema was reflecting that confusion in increasingly raw ways. Taboo arrived right at that intersection, using explicit content not as spectacle but as language to examine something genuinely uncomfortable about human psychology. What made Taboo truly explosive was its premise and its star. The film centers on a widowed mother and her teenage son. The boundaries between them begin to dissolve through grief, loneliness, and emotional desperation that feels disturbingly human. At the center was Kay Parker. Parker wasn't just any performer. She brought genuine acting ability to the screen, emotional depth, the capacity to make you forget you were watching a performance. Her role in Taboo became the standard against which every other performance in the genre would be measured. Behind this cultural landmark was director Kirdy Stevens, whose real name was Al Ostrander. Stevens wasn't interested in making just another adult film. He wanted to tell a story that happened to contain explicit content, not the other way around. He built the film around Kay Parker, structured the narrative to give her room to actually perform, and made a conscious choice that separated Taboo from almost everything else in the genre. He prioritized character over spectacle. The script, credited to Helen Terry, gave Parker dialogue that felt written for an actress, not just a performer going through motions. What makes Parker's performance fascinating isn't just the controversy, it's how she inhabits the role. In most adult features of the era, performers played archetypes. But Parker plays her character as a real person, navigating grief, someone whose judgment is clouded not by lust, but by loneliness. Her screen presence carries genuine vulnerability. She doesn't play the role as if she's in control. She plays it as if control was lost long before the film began. That's what made audiences uncomfortable, not the explicitness, the realism. Surrounding Parker was an ensemble that elevated the material. Mike Ranger, cast as her son Paul, brought an awkward authenticity that made the dynamic feel disturbingly real rather than fantastical. His performance required delicate balance, vulnerable enough to seem sympathetic, never manipulative enough to feel predatory. Dorothy LeMay appeared in a supporting role that provided crucial contrast, her scenes functioning as reminders of normalcy that made the core relationship feel even more transgressive. Juliet Anderson, already a respected industry figure by 1980, brought gravitas to her appearance. Rounding out the cast were Mike Horner and Miko Yanni. Stevens demanded committed performances across the board, understanding that if even one actor treated the premise as a joke, the entire film would collapse. Visually, Taboo doesn't look like most adult films from 1980. The cinematography, handled by Jack Remy, avoids the flat, overlit aesthetic common to low-budget productions. Scenes are framed with attention to mood. The lighting creates shadows. The camera movements feel deliberate. Stevens understood that if audiences were going to accept this story, they needed to believe in the world. The film was shot on 35mm film stock, still relatively rare for adult productions managing tight budgets. That choice gave Taboo a cinematic texture that elevated it above its contemporaries. Production took place over a few weeks, primarily in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. Stevens chose suburban homes that felt authentically middle-class American, not the glamorous Los Angeles aesthetic dominating most adult productions. The house used for the McBride family was a modest, single-story home in quiet residential neighborhoods north of the Golden Gate Bridge, chosen because it felt ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of place that could exist anywhere in America. The San Francisco Bay Area location gave Stevens access to crew with actual film production experience, cinematographers, and sound technicians who had worked on legitimate, independent films. The budget was estimated between $75,000 and $100,000, substantial for the genre. Stevens invested where it mattered: film stock, proper lighting equipment, time for rehearsal. The production moved slowly by adult film standards, allowing Parker and Ranger to develop their performances. That patience shows in the final product. The timing was critical. The 1980s sat right at the edge of a massive shift. The home video revolution was beginning. VCRs were entering American households. The theatrical adult film industry was about to collapse. Taboo arrived just as that world was ending. It represented the last gasp of an era when adult films still tried to be films, when performers like Kay Parker could deliver something that felt like genuine cinema. The theatrical release was carefully managed. Taboo premiered in adult theaters across major cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, but found its way into smaller markets where curiosity outweighed stigma. Word of mouth spread quickly. The film grossed an estimated $6 to $8 million during its theatrical run, an extraordinary figure demonstrating genuine cultural penetration. That success guaranteed sequels. Taboo 2 arrived in 1982, followed by Taboo 3, and eventually an entire franchise extending through the decade. But none captured what made the original work. They became increasingly formulaic, trading emotional authenticity for outlandish scenarios. The original worked because it felt dangerous, because it crossed a line audiences weren't sure should be crossed. But more importantly, Taboo became a reference point, proving adult cinema could still aspire beyond mere titillation. The most lasting impact is how Taboo defined Kay Parker's legacy. Many performers from the Golden Age are remembered for volume, the sheer number of films they appeared in. Parker is remembered for one role. She made other films, appeared in several Taboo sequels, but this performance overshadowed everything else. Not because it was the most explicit, but because it was the most human. Parker brought emotional complexity to a role that could have been pure exploitation. She made audiences feel complicit, not voyeurs, participants. For Kirdy Stevens, Taboo was both a breakthrough and a burden. He proved adult cinema could tell meaningful stories, but spent the rest of his career chasing what made the original so powerful. The sequels were competent, even polished, but never recaptured the emotional danger of the first film. Kay Parker's relationship with Taboo was equally complex. She took pride in the performance she delivered, but understood the cost. Hollywood never looked past the stigma. The film made her iconic and simultaneously closed every other door. She stepped away from performing in the late 1980s, but her impact never faded. Film scholars and critics still return to Taboo when discussing the limits of explicit cinema. Parker achieved something rare, a performance that transcended its genre and became genuine film acting. The title says everything: Taboo, a film about crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. In 1980, audiences weren't sure they should be watching, but they did. Because Stevens and Parker created something more than exploitation. They used transgression to explore grief, loneliness, and the collapse of emotional boundaries. Today, Taboo remains one of the most studied films in adult cinema history, not for shock value, but for its seriousness, for its craft, for giving Kay Parker the space to truly act, and for arriving at the exact moment when that kind of ambition was about to disappear from the genre entirely. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Golden Age cinema history, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold stories from this era.